Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Antoinette, a New Zealander who has been living for the past 8 years in Germany. And in this video today, I'm going to be talking about the pros and the cons of living in New Zealand. And I know this is a video that has been going around quite a lot on YouTube, but I've decided to make my own version of this video because I get so many questions from people asking about New Zealand. And I get a lot of people messaging me, people who are possibly wanting to immigrate to New Zealand, and they ask me questions like, is it true that New Zealand is the most beautiful country in the world? Is there anything negative about New Zealand? I also get a lot of people asking me, why did you move to Germany? Why did you not stay in New Zealand? Is it because you don't like it? And the truth is, I did not move to Germany because I don't like New Zealand. I love New Zealand. New Zealand is my heart, my homeland. The real reason why I moved to Germany is because my husband, he's German, and we had to make the decision to live in either New Zealand or Germany. It wasn't an easy decision. We were just really lucky to be able to decide between two amazing countries, New Zealand and Germany. And we feel like at this particular stage in our life, Germany is the right fit for us and for our family. And that doesn't mean to say that we're not going to move to New Zealand in the future. That is definitely possible. I'm going to start with the cons because I do want to end this on a positive note. And no matter how amazing a country is, there's always going to be cons to living in that country. And New Zealand is no exception. It's not perfect. So here are the cons of living in New Zealand. New Zealand is in the middle of nowhere. We are very isolated from the rest of the world, and this is a huge problem if you love to travel. And for me personally, it's a huge con because I absolutely love to travel. The fact that New Zealand is so isolated, that doesn't stop us Kiwis from traveling. We still travel, but it makes it a lot harder and a lot more expensive. It is so expensive to travel if you are living in New Zealand. For me to get back home to visit my family in New Zealand, I have to travel a minimum of 24 hours, and that's not counting the layovers and all that kind of thing. Something I love about living in Germany in the center of Europe is that it is so easy to get to other countries. If I want to, I can go for a long weekend to Italy or to the Netherlands or Poland, and it's just not a big deal and it's not expensive. Actually, last time I was in New Zealand, I was talking to an Italian guy who was married to a Kiwi. He had a Kiwi Italian family. He was very settled in New Zealand, and I asked him, do you like living in New Zealand? And he said, yes, but I feel like I'm trapped on this little island. And I totally understood where he was coming from, because I feel like if I ever move back to New Zealand, I have the fear that I would have that feeling too of being kind of trapped and not being able to travel as easily as I can living in Germany. Okay, so another con to living in New Zealand is the fact that there is a very high rate of skin cancer. And that is because over top of New Zealand there is a very big hole in the ozone layer. So basically we have no protection from the really dangerous UV rays. In New Zealand you have to really protect yourself from the sun. It is very easy to get burnt, and you don't have to be in the sun for very long before you are very badly sunburnt. I remember when my husband was in New Zealand and he was just so used to the sun in Germany. He could lie out for hours in the sun and not get burnt, and he actually has the kind of skin that doesn't burn very easily. Normally he just goes really brown instead of going red and burning. He was actually at the beach for the whole day without any sun protection, and even though it was a very overcast day, by the end of the day he was so badly burnt, he was blistered, he was in agony. I wasn't actually there that day, but I had previously warned him about the New Zealand sun and how dangerous it was, and he was just like, yeah, and he didn't realize just how harsh and how intense the New Zealand sun was, and he definitely learned his lesson after that day. Another con to living in New Zealand is the fact that we are located on a big fault line, which means we are prone to earthquakes. And I am absolutely terrified of earthquakes. I think probably everybody is. And luckily in my lifetime I've never experienced a really serious earthquake. But growing up in New Zealand, I have experienced a lot of very small earthquakes. It's just a normal part of growing up in New Zealand, feeling these little earthquakes. It's very scary living in fear that at any moment there could be a massive earthquake where you could lose your home and everything you own just in like a split second. And I feel like a lot of us Kiwis, we just kind of push it to the back of our mind, but it's always kind of there, that fear that there could be a huge earthquake. Another con to living in New Zealand is the fact that New Zealand is such an expensive country to live in. The price of food, of clothes, of real estate, of services, of travel, just everything is very expensive in New Zealand. And I do understand, because New Zealand is in the middle of nowhere, we have to have so many products imported into New Zealand, so naturally there's going to be a big markup on price. But I do feel like some of the locally grown and produced products in New Zealand are still very expensive. And even compared to Australia, I lived in Australia for a couple of years. I lived in Melbourne, and I feel like compared to Australia, the prices in New Zealand are very high. And not only is New Zealand an expensive place to live, but I feel like the salaries aren't that high compared to the cost of living. I feel like there's a real imbalance between what people earn and how much everything costs. There's definitely rich people in New Zealand, but a lot of people are really struggling to get by. That's one thing that I did notice when I was back in New Zealand. I noticed a lot of people struggling because of the high prices, and I really think that this is a big con to living in New Zealand. And another con to living in New Zealand is the fact that we don't have a really wide variety of jobs, because our population is only around 4.7 million, and because of that there just isn't the jobs out there, and a lot of New Zealanders actually end up moving to Australia because there's a wider selection of jobs and the pay is a lot better. You can earn a lot more money living in Australia. So job wise, I feel like there isn't that many opportunities in New Zealand compared to a lot of other countries. Okay, so enough of the cons. I'm sick of talking about them. Let's get on to the pros of living in New Zealand, because there are a lot of pros to living in New Zealand. Okay, one of the pros to living in New Zealand is the fact that New Zealand is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. For such a small country, New Zealand has an incredible range of landscapes, of beaches, rainforests, glaciers, mountains. There's just so much to do in New Zealand, and if you like the outdoors, New Zealand is the place to be. I've heard people say that if you have the chance to travel around the whole of New Zealand, from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island, then you have basically seen the whole world, because in one tiny little country there is so much to offer. The landscape is just so beautiful and so diverse. And another pro to living in New Zealand is the fact that New Zealand has only 4.7 million people, and some people might consider this a con, but most people actually consider this a pro, because we have a small population, but New Zealand is quite a big country when you compare it to other countries. A lot of people actually don't know that New Zealand and Germany are actually similar sizes, except New Zealand has 4.7 million people and Germany has just over 82 million people. So you can imagine how much space there is in New Zealand and how fresh the air is in New Zealand with such a small population compared to the size of the country. Most families in New Zealand live in a decent sized house with a big backyard, which is definitely not possible if you live in a country that is highly populated. You can go for walks along beautiful beaches and be the only person on that beach. Some people don't like the fact that New Zealand is so isolated from the rest of the world, but other people feel this sense of freedom in New Zealand because there's just so much space and not many people, and they just feel free. Another pro to living in New Zealand is that nowhere in the world will you find more friendly, welcoming, just down-to-earth people. Kiwis are just the best people, honestly. I remember when my husband first visited New Zealand, he was absolutely blown away by how welcoming people were. He had people who he hardly knew welcome him into his home, and he just couldn't believe that, because it's not like that in Germany. People in New Zealand just have this really chilled, laid-back attitude about life. It's just like, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine, and I absolutely love that. I feel like a lot of New Zealanders, they don't take life too seriously and they just know how to have fun and laugh, and you'll go to New Zealand and you'll see people, they smile a lot. I feel like in general New Zealanders are really happy people, and it shows in the way they walk around smiling at people, and they're just very friendly to strangers. I feel like in New Zealand there's not really this class system that exists in some other countries, and you're not judged on your career or, you know, how much money you have. Of course there's a little bit of that going on, but mostly everyone's just welcome and people accept you for how you are. And last but not least, a huge pro to living in New Zealand is the fact that it is an amazing country for raising kids. And I know this because I grew up in New Zealand and I had an amazing childhood. In New Zealand, there's so much space for children to run around and be free and explore, and I feel like there's not that kind of big pressure in New Zealand for kids to have the flashiest gear and, you know, the most expensive clothes and that kind of thing. I feel like kids are just allowed to be kids. And there's probably a little bit of that going on in schools and that kind of thing, but I think it is pretty minimal compared to a lot of other countries. I feel like New Zealanders in general aren't really materialistic people, which I really love. I think Kiwi kids are just really down to earth and they're raised to be really humble adults. I feel like school in New Zealand is pretty chilled out and children aren't put under this huge amount of pressure to perform academically at a really young age. And I think school is just about having fun, and it doesn't mean to say that New Zealanders don't perform well academically, but they're not put under this huge pressure when they're really young to do really well in tests and things like that. I just feel like in general New Zealand is a wonderful place to grow up and to raise a family, and I just have the best memories of my childhood growing up in New Zealand. So guys, that's all I've got for this video. If you think I've left anything really important off the list, then feel free to mention that in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, feel free to follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye!